So welcome to 2025. This is my first video of the year, and we have a lot to talk about. So let's get straight into it. We're going to start with this new paper on preventing long COVID. I'm Dr. Jared Younger. I'm director of the Neuroinflammation, Pain, and Fatigue Laboratory. And the question for today is, can we prevent long COVID with a simple over-the-counter antihistamine? And that was the question that was asked by this research group, and their results are pretty intriguing. So let's take a look at what they did, and let's discuss whether long COVID can be prevented by antihistamines. First of all, let's go through the basics really quick. Long COVID goes under several other names, is a condition that develops after a SARS-CoV-2 infection. And these individuals have chronic extreme fatigue, and they have cognitive problems, and they usually have a handful of sensory symptoms as well. It can range in severity, it can range in degree of disability. I would say the condition is pretty common. I would put the prevalence conservatively at around 5% of the total population, which is about 16 million people in the United States alone. Many people with long COVID will eventually recover. It could take 3 months or 6 months, may take a year. But then others, a large proportion of those individuals, they have sustained issues. It doesn't resolve even 2 years, 3 years later. So this is a significant problem, an ongoing significant problem for a large number of people. Now, right now, there are several research groups that are testing treatments for long COVID, but this research group wanted to know if we can prevent long COVID from developing in the first place. And the name of their paper is Mitigating the Risks of Post-Acute Sequelae of SARS-CoV-2 Infection, or PASC, with Intranasal Chlorpheniramine, Perspectives from the Across Study. Now, this is an open access paper, so you can read it in full. I put the link to the paper in the description, and I encourage you to look at the paper for the details. I'm really glad that they made it open access so everyone can get a hold of it. Now, the study was funded by Dr. Frere Biopharma, and they develop intranasal therapies. The authors of the paper report no conflicts of interest. And from what they report, the pharma company was not involved in the conduct of the study or the analyses or the interpretation of the data. Now, chlorpheniramine is an antihistamine. This means it blocks the histamine, so we typically use this to reduce allergic responses. In fact, this drug is in several over-the-counter products that don't require a physician prescription. It's a drug with a really long history of safe use. It was FDA approved for use in the United States in 1950, so it's not a new experimental treatment. The research team here hypothesized that histamines are responsible from converting acute COVID into long COVID. So an antihistamine given at the right time might prevent the development of long COVID. So you have the SARS-CoV-2 infection, but then you don't get the long COVID part of it. Antihistamines likely work by decreasing the viral load, and they can also prevent the upregulation of mast cells and histamines and that prime chronic inflammation. And so there's a few reasons that are supported by other studies why antihistamines might prevent long COVID from developing. But to be clear, this research group is not interested in treating long COVID. This is a study about preventing it. So let's go through the specifics. There were 259 individuals with laboratory confirmed acute COVID-19 that were included in the analyses. 58 of those people received 1% intranasal chlorpheniramine. These people mostly had the older Delta variant of SARS-CoV-2. 84 of those people received 0.4% intranasal chlorpheniramine. Most of those people had the Omicron variant. And then 120 people received placebo, and they were mixed between the two SARS-CoV-2 variants. It's because one group was run earlier than the other one. Now, the treatment was 10 days, and then 3 times a day, people would use the intranasal application. So, of course, they would shoot this up the nostrils. And now this was a prospective randomized control trial. I would call this an exploratory clinical trial, meaning that the results need to be confirmed in a separate confirmatory clinical trial before we can really strongly suggest the usage of the treatment. It needs to have confirmatory data with a different group of people. And do note that all of these individuals were receiving standard of care treatment in addition to the clofeniramine. So the antihistamine trial was in addition to standard care, and that's because it wasn't appropriate to prevent people from taking the standard of care stuff just for this clinical trial. So they had a mix of different other treatments depending on how severe their particular case was. The main outcome are the long COVID symptoms that are reported by participants a few months after the acute COVID infection. And this is, a few months after the infection. The question is, have they fully recovered, or are they having some kind of chronic symptoms after their infection? Now, the amount of time between the infection and their outcome assessment, I guess, is 3 to 12 months. I guess we can call it a follow-up session. So some people had it relatively short after their infection when they were asked these questions, and some people it was a longer period of time, but somewhere between 3 and 12 months for most of the participants. Now let's take a look at the outcome assessment. It's these 17 questions. You can see them right here, and they ask questions about the most likely symptoms that you might have if you have long COVID. Now there's probably over 100 potential symptoms you could have, but these are the major ones. And then the idea is pretty simple. If the drug works, fewer people should report long COVID symptoms when they reach their follow-up session. Now, the results are strong. Here's the main figure. It's blurry in the online version. I wasn't able to get a clearer version, so I'm just going to walk you through it. The blue bars are the number of people in the placebo group who report the symptom. And then the red bars are the number of people in the antihistamine group that reported the symptom. So let's take a look at the main ones. First, 17 people who received placebo reported daily fatigue months after their infection, but none of those receiving the clofeniramine reported fatigue. That's very interesting. Then looking at headaches, 37 reported headaches, but only one person receiving the treatment reported headaches. 22 people reported concentration problems, but none of the people receiving the antihistamine reported concentration problems in the follow-up. 7 people reported loss of taste or smell in placebo, but none receiving the antihistamine treatment. 38 people reported symptoms that interfered with their daily activities, but only one person receiving the antihistamine said that. And then 48 people reported getting some kind of medical attention for post-infection issues in the placebo group, but none of those who received the antihistamine reported receiving or seeking medical treatment. And all of these are statistically significant. So taken together, you have a better chance of fully recovering from a COVID infection and avoiding long COVID if you take this intranasal antihistamine for 10 days at the tail end of your infection. My interpretation, everything looks pretty good. The effect is impressive and could definitely be helpful to people, and preventing long COVID is certainly something we would like to do and would like to see more of. The limitations in terms of you getting this, this drug is widely available in drugstores, but it's always in oral form. I don't think I've ever seen it in intranasal form in drug markets or drugstores around me. And we don't know if the oral form would have the same benefits. It's possible that it has to be intranasal to work. I don't know. Intranasal clofeniramine is not widely produced to my knowledge. I think you would have to get it from the pharmaceutical company that funded this study. They do sell this, or you'd have to get a compounding pharmacy to make it for you, which they can do. So there are a few ways to get a hold of this. Other limitations, we don't know if other intranasal antihistamines would have the same effect. If you go to your drugstore, you'll find intranasal antihistamines, but they're a different drug. And so we don't know for sure. They might work the same way. It's possible, but we don't know because there's no study. So you can't just grab whatever and expect it to work. We don't have the scientific information to tell us whether that's true. And then really important, I think the most important point for people to realize is we don't know if it works once you already have long COVID. So this is about preventing long COVID, not treating it. This study does not tell us whether intranasal antihistamines stop long COVID, and that's really important. So the timing of when you take this could be really important, and it might be difficult to get this drug right when you need it because you're going to need it for a future SARS-CoV-2 infection, not the one that you already have had. So I think the study was, I guess, another limitation. It was more, I guess I can call it naturalistic, or more naturalistic than a proper stringent clinical trial, because people had different comorbid issues and they had other treatments. So it wasn't really strongly controlled, but that was the intention of the research group. And there's reasons why they did that. So the bottom line, it looks promising. I would like to see at least one more study, though it's probably harder to get a good sample now that most people don't test for SARS-CoV-2 and they're less likely to go to a hospital. So these trials are getting more difficult to run. So I don't know if there's any other studies planned for this treatment, but there's not enough data in this one paper to recommend this treatment yet. You really, for any drug, we have to see multiple studies before we can strongly recommend something. If I wanted to try this myself, I would have to have the SARS-CoV-2 home tests at my house ready to go in case I catch it. And then I would have to have a bottle of this ready to go in case, again, I get the COVID-19 infection. So I'd have to have everything ready to go. So I'm not trying to get this intranasal drug right when I need it. And I don't know if a lot of people are going to do that. But anyway, the findings fit with several other recent reports. It ties in with the mast cell discussion that we should have soon. So I think it's very interesting. Now, I hope that's helpful. I hope that's at least interesting. I know that people who are interested in treatments like this probably already have long COVID. We didn't know about this treatment approach 3 years ago when it would have been really, really helpful. But maybe this knowledge will help us better understand and better treat long COVID. So that's it. I just wanted to present this paper real quickly, and I'm still excited to see that there's so many more clinical trials becoming available in these conditions that we research. So thanks everyone for listening, and I will be back next week.